सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The words came in on a Friday morning, directly from the angel. The angel being the top secret Israeli source at the core of Egypt's establishment. The Egyptian army and the Syrian army are about to launch an attack on Israel on Saturday, October 6, 1973, towards the evening. Israeli intelligence officer Freddie Aimi telegraphed to Prime Minister Golda Meir's military secretary, Yisrael Lior. Egyptian troops would push across the Suez Canal into the Sinai to a depth of 10 kilometers and then hold their line. 50 years since then, Hamas assault units have struck across the Israel-Gaza border under cover of fire from thousands of low-technology rockets, drawing the Israel Defense Forces into murderous skirmishes at up to a dozen small towns and villages. Hamas assault teams have succeeded in killing 700 troops and civilians. Little doubt exists Israel's intelligence and defense forces were blind to the incoming threat. Earlier this summer, Emmanuel Fabian reported the Israeli military had deployed away some 25 internal security battalions into the West Bank to police potential violence between far-right settler groups and Palestinians. That, according to these reports, left outposts facing the Gaza border undermanned. Hamas, unlike the Egyptian army in 1973, knows it cannot recover territory or defeat the IDF in combat. This might be called a war by politicians, but it more closely resembles the kind of insurgent raiding the British used to experience along undivided India's northern frontiers. And like Egypt, Hamas knows that while it can overwhelm static defense lines, it can't go much further. The real objective of the violence is almost certainly political. Hamas is letting Israel and Saudi Arabia know it can sabotage the United States-backed process of diplomatic normalization on which the geopolitical future of the Middle East is being rebuilt. Hamas wants a place in that world, and it has the support of many Palestinians living through the perpetual nightmare in Gaza who are unwilling to end their resistance in return for just a few more Saudi jobs or some economic aid. Like the 1973 war, the crisis that has exploded now holds out three important lessons for all nation states confronted with long insurgencies and terrorism. First, nation states that sit on their hand and wonder what to do next often discover their adversaries have used that time to sharpen their claws. Second, there is no technology or tactic that guarantees a state perpetual superiority over weaker adversaries. The successful conduct of war demands endless intellectual creativity and innovation. And finally, the use of force, no matter how skilled and well-resourced, is a means, not an end. Lacking the will to resolve underlying political and social problems gives adversaries time and space to perpetuate a conflict. The third temple is in danger, mumbled the legendary military commander and defense minister Moshe Dayan the morning after Egyptian and Syrian troops stormed Israel's borders exactly as the angel had said on 6 October 1973. In 1967, Israel had annihilated the flower of Egypt's military inside days. This time, less than 24 hours into the war, it was clear things were very different. The war hero seemed incoherent. At one moment, he advocated Israeli withdrawal from part of the Sinai desert, at others, the use of nuclear bombs as a show of deterrence. From Israeli archives, which were declassified just a few days ago, and little of it is so far available in English, it is clear Israeli intelligence on the prospect of war was heavily influenced by intellectual filters designed by Major General Eli Zeira, the IDF head of intelligence. The intelligence concepcia or conception held among other things that Egypt would not go to war until it had the means to paralyze Israel's air force with equipment like long-range bombers capable of targeting airfields deep inside the country. Former US State Department official Michael Doran, in a brilliant recent essay, writes that when the King of Jordan made a secret visit to Israel on the eve of that war to warn the Prime Minister that a crisis was imminent, Zeira proved impossible to persuade. He just wouldn't believe Egypt could attack. Less than 24 hours before the war began, Mossad recorded that the Soviet Union was evacuating its military advisors. Zeira again refused to take the threat seriously. Looking back, this was not unreasonable. What possible motive might Egyptian President Anwar el-Sadat have for starting a war in which thousands of deaths were certain, unless he hoped to be able to seize back the Sinai, lost in 1967? The loss had given Israel access to oil as well as control over the Suez Canal, shocks that Egypt had only been able to survive by becoming a Soviet client state. The IDF, though, didn't know that President Sadat had settled for a much more complex strategy. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Meek notes that this strategy accepted Israeli dominance of the air. Instead, Sadat hoped only to protect small zones of Egyptian incursion into Sinai with new generation Soviet air defense missiles like the SAM-6. Egyptian armored officers, moreover, had studied Israeli armored maneuver tactics obsessively and concluded that IDF tanks, which were certain to respond, could be defeated by their new shoulder-fired missile. Lulling the IDF deeper into sleep, even as it practiced its own revolution in military affairs, Egypt staged mobilizations of troops and military maneuvers no less than 22 times in 1972-1973, on average once a month. After a while, the Israelis barely noticed the maneuvers, and one of those maneuvers became the eventual attack. The words of the angel, the legendary agent revealed to have been former President Jamal Abdel Nasser's son-in-law, Ashraf Marwan, finally shook Israeli complacency. The country now ordered a mobilization. But there was no actual response, even as Egyptian soldiers began to take the last steps towards attacking the thinly held fortresses through which Israel protected the Suez Canal. Following the 1973 war, the Justice Shimon Agranat Commission savaged the key actors responsible for these failures and recommended the sacking both of Zeira and Chief of Staff David Elazar. 50 years of historical study and introspection, though, tells us the problem was deeper than a couple of intelligence misjudgments. Prime Minister May was herself doggedly resistant to preemptive strikes after receiving warnings from the United States. Even as Russia and Egypt prepared for the attack, the United States was pushing Israel not to strike first. Less than a week into the war, declassified documents show Israel's cabinet was dangerously worn, fearing the worst. Instead of the quick war it had always hoped and prepared for, there was now a massive conventional conflict that consumed men and material on an industrial scale. It was only after a gargantuan United States airlift began that the tide began to reverse. This time around too, Israel will be dependent on external assistance, in some cases the result of the trap of seeing technology as a solution to complex problems of public policy and politics. Take the example of Israel's Iron Dome, which was originally designed to protect critical strategic installations. Politicians, though, promised it to guard the public from harm too. Each interceptor, though, is estimated to cost over $80,000, while Hamas produces crude rockets for what? A couple of $100 or less. Former Israeli Special Forces officer Colonel Yassi Langotsky had warned several years ago that the high-technology Gaza wall, in which the IDF and political leadership placed great faith, could and would be penetrated. Indeed, mobs, not terrorists, stormed parts of the fence in 2018, a warning of the kinds of threats now demonstrated in stark relief. Worst of all, the IDF let itself focus on protecting settlements in the West Bank, a key political constituency for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. These commitments deepened extremist Jews' tensions with other religious communities in the West Bank. Like all armies and bureaucracies everywhere in the world, the IDF has shown it's a victim of self-delusion. The director of the United States Bureau of Intelligence and Research, Ray Klein, noted back in 1973 that they were brainwashed by the Israelis who brainwashed themselves. Exactly the same things happened again. There's little doubt that tactically skilled and well-trained IDF will succeed in crushing Hamas incursions in the next few days. What follows, though, could have enormous consequences. The 2006 and 2014 invasion of Gaza caused enormous civilian hardship and losses to the IDF as well. But it didn't end Israel's terrorism problem. The French scholar Jean-Pierre Filiou has noted that all 12 military campaigns in Gaza eventually ended in some kind of ugly stalemate. Fighting ground battles is not easy. I quote, "Israel has tried everything in Gaza and failed repeatedly," Filiou notes. The time has come for Israel to consider if allowing the Palestinian question to fester serves its own interests, including stability at home and a secure place in the wider Middle East geopolitical order. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint. Thank you for watching Security Code.